Okay, if you want to all take your seats, we're going to go into panel number 2. Panel number 2 is going to be a discussion of our state's private nonprofit hatchery system, its challenges, its opportunities, and so what we have here from this side to that side, they're going to give just a brief bio, but Steve here, Reifenstahl, the Northern Southeast Regional Aquaculture Organization for 40 years and consulting for about 5 now since then. A guy I kind of hope to meet over the years because we're both sort of goofy athletes or adult athletes, but then Craig Medred, again, journalist, critical thinker. We've got Bill Templin, who's the chief fisheries scientist for Commercial Fish Division from Alaska Fish and Game, and Larry Phillips, who's the policy director for the Pacific Northwest wing of the American Sportfish Association. He'll go last, listen to the conversation, and then maybe offer some things that he has learned, that they've learned in the Pacific Northwest that can help inform our future. I'm going to go down, I'm moderating, but I'm pretty sure these adults can get along without me, and start with Steve, go to Bill, Craig will pipe in as he does, and then Larry will finish it up.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, Kevin. Kevin said that I should only speak for 10 minutes. I'm going to try to shorten that to 5. And he also said to give a little bio. So I've been very fortunate that I've had two careers, both spanning about 50 years now. One as a scientist, biologist, and another as an athlete. Almost all of it in Alaska. Been across every mountain range, done thousands of miles of ocean kayaking, and spent a lot of time in salmon streams. So I'm going to try to give you an idea of what the state's program, the Salmon Enhancement Program, is all about. And I expect that not many of you know a lot about it. And I'd like you to come away with 3 things that you might remember. One is that the total economic output of the Salmon Enhancement Program in Alaska is about $500 million. And the economic benefit to sport fishermen, sport charter, is pretty significant. We don't count that value, but the gist of it is the sports catch about 15,000 Chinook salmon every year from those programs, about 40,000 sockeye from those programs, and about 90,000 coho from those programs. And the other part is that fishermen, commercial fishermen, pay for those programs in total. So there's no cost to the state, there's no cost to the users that do catch those fish. So I'll go into some of the detail. The program started in the 1970s. You heard the commissioner mention that the state fisheries were in the toilet. They were at the historical lows in the mid-70s, early 70s, and the state responded to that. So one of the things was strict management to be able to get fish into the stream so we could have spawners that were going to reproduce. The other part was to start the enhancement program, which was called the FRED division, part of the Department of Fish and Game. That had about a $14 million budget. They built numerous hatcheries across the state, and then about 4 years later, new legislation came to be that initiated the enhancement program for the private nonprofit sector. It created that sector. That sector was paid for by fishermen. They taxed themselves 1% to 3% depending on the region of the state. That money came in and those became the operational costs. I think that one of the things that is really unique about this program is that I think most people out here are probably business people, certainly fisher people, but private nonprofits were able to operate these facilities that used to be operated by Fish and Game at a much reduced cost and a much higher efficiency. The return on investment to fishermen that are paying these bills is about 6 to 7 to 1. That's the benefit to cost. That's unheard of. And so that's why I've been very proud to work in this program for over 40 years, because it's similar to what you read about in Silicon Valley. It was a startup in the mid-'70s. We worked 7 days a week, many hours to get these programs off the ground. There was always something more to do, and we built these fairly quickly from the 70s to the late 80s, and then they've kind of, from about 1990, there hasn't been any great changes in those programs. The production's about the same. In 1988, the state decided it was just too expensive, or they wanted to trim the budget. So they cut the FRED division, which saved the department about $14 million a year. And those programs could be operated by the private nonprofits if they chose to. That was up to them. In 1988, I signed a contract with the state to operate one of those facilities in Southeast Alaska. And I think one of the main things that I wanted to reinforce, and one of the things I'm hoping you will take home, is that in Southeast, the support by sportsmen, they're actually on the board of directors of these nonprofits, but they share in the Chinook, Sockeye, and Coho that return, and the sport charter lodges have built up around some of these programs because of the ability to have fish nearby their lodge and be able to harvest those fish. And so they have a business model that works very well there. Valdez does a similar thing. I don't know about the lodges in the Valdez Arm, but some 200,000 coho are caught in that area. Let's see, the Sockeye facility at Main Bay and Prince William Sound is also used by many people in the Anchorage Bowl. I guess one thing I'd like to say about research, and the commissioner hit on this, and Senator Sullivan did as well, is that this Salmon Research Initiative, I was part of that. I was asked to be on that panel, and we did that work that resulted in a report in about 12 months. And I was heartened to hear the senator say that they're looking at money, because the report's very nice. It does point out where some of the gaps are and what we need further research on. But if we don't have money, we can't really get to the answer to that. Another aspect of research, what I think that Bill may be talking about, is that in 2011, I was involved with 2 other people. We went to the commissioner, and we believed we needed to do research on the straying issue, which we're going to talk more about later. And we were able to get $4 million through the legislature in 2011 to initiate this program. And the total cost of that project was about $22 million, not counting the in-kind contribution that Fish and Game makes, which probably puts it at more like $30 million over that 13-year period. And we're getting to the close of that research now. But that research was driven by the PMPs. They paid for, other than that $4 million, they paid for much of that through contributions of their own and through commercial processors. So with that, I'll make it brief. I think I went 7 minutes, but that's all I have for now. Thank you.
How's that? All right. Throw something at me. I tend to walk around as I talk, so hopefully you can hear me long enough. I guess I'm in the sweet spot. So as I was introduced, my name is Bill Templin. I'm a longtime Alaskan. My earliest memories are in Anchorage during really cold winters when it was really cold. And you had ice on the inside corners of the walls. We haven't seen that for a while. But I remember that. I remember also fish. Everywhere you could see, everywhere would be fish that you could walk across the streams on the backs of. At least that's what people told me it used to be like. I do remember fishing in the Upper Susitna. I remember fishing Chester Creek in Anchorage. I love to fish, so I fished even in Russian Jack. If you've ever been to the Russian Jack golf course, there's a little spring there that has little golden fin trout in it. And I caught those. It was great growing up in Alaska, and I grew up an Alaskan. I believe in Alaska. I drank the Kool-Aid, you might think, because it is a very different place, Alaska is. In Alaska, unlike most other states in the nation, Alaska is more than just a location. It's also an attitude, and it's an ownership, and it's an acceptance of responsibility. Nowhere else that I've gone have I seen the processes that we have here where the public gets to speak into what happens with the resources. So that's my sermon, but I just wanted you to know I'm speaking as a longtime Alaskan. I left for a little while, realized that I just missed it here, came back, and I've been working with the department for about 30 years, last May. So I'm hanging on for a little while to make sure I clean up my office before I leave. During my time here, I was with the department. I've worked from the very bottom, one of the lowest paid positions, which is a graduate intern. You don't even get benefits or time off or anything, up to where I am now as the chief fisheries scientist. And along the way, I worked for 20 years in the genetics program. Alaska Department of Fish and Game's genetics program is unusual across the nation, and a lot of other states have come to us to ask how that program works and what we do. I've also seen Alaska take on some massive projects and take on those projects with a lot of public input. I don't think anybody here probably understands just how big the Western Alaska Salmon Stock Identification Project was, or program really. WASIP it's called. It sampled fisheries all the way from Kotzebue, every fishery along the coast, all the way down around the corner up to Chignik. The length of that is about the length of the West Coast, a little longer than the West Coast because it goes down and around Baja if you were to measure it in a line. 3 years, lots of money, lots of energy, lots of public input there. Also, the Chinook Salmon Research Initiative, which in the early 20-teens was kicked off in order to take a look at what's happening in Chinook even back that early. One of the reasons we can do these things is because it's vital for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to be funded to get the work done that's needed to maintain the resource. In Alaska, the principle for why we do things is baked into our Constitution. It's in the Constitution that we need to be managing for sustained yield. We need to be thinking about the future and not short-term gains. Also, that the resources of the state are owned by the people of the state. From that principle, it's made usable through policies. Policies like the Sustainable Salmon Fisheries Policy, the Escapement Goal Fisheries Policies. These policies make something vague, like in the Constitution it says, sustained yield principle subject to preferences among beneficial uses. Well, that's a great principle, but how do you apply that? I bet you everybody in this room would have a slightly different idea about what that balance should be among preferential uses. So policy, that's where the principles work out. We've got genetics policies, we've got pathology policies, we've got a lot of policies. And then we have a process. And again, like I've touched on this before, we have a process that reviews what's happening, maybe makes changes in fishery management plans or other things, but that process allows the public to speak into those decisions in multiple ways. At the Board of Fish, at the RPT meeting for hatcheries, et cetera. Even sometimes in the hatchery, in the ADF&G permitting process. So principles, policy, process. If you don't remember anything else I said, remember those 3 Ps. Maybe add a 4th for public input. So I work for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and the mission statement there includes the responsibility to manage for the benefit of the economy and the well-being of Alaskans. So again, going back to what I was saying earlier, that's where we start from. We're working we have the responsibility to manage for the benefit of the economy and the well-being of Alaskans. That means we adopt a precautionary approach, but it's important to remember a precautionary approach is not just a biological principle. It's also economic, it's also societal, and it's cultural. The definition of the precautionary approach includes all 4 of those aspects. This means that when the Alaska Department of Fish and Game engages in research, which some might think is frivolous use of dollars and probably shouldn't happen. Our research is not for the sake of research. We don't do it so we can write papers. We don't do it so that we can fill out our CV or get an invitation to go talk somewhere. Our research focuses on management applications over publication. Our research is focused to serve best by the people, to serve best the people. Who are we doing this for? Who are the people using this resource for? And sometimes, many times, it's the whole state. ADF&G research is served best by thinking before we run models. We spend the time thinking about what we're going to do, whether it's a good idea to do, whether it can actually be accomplished prior to actually going out and spending the money and the time to conduct the research. And finally, and this is an important part, it seeks to understand the causes and the mechanisms behind what we see in order to know what to do and what outcomes to expect if we take action. We need those mechanisms. We need to understand those causes. Not all of them, but at least enough to make sure that we're not screwing things up worse if we make a decision, or affecting the economy or the local community. So with that in mind, I was informed that we'd be talking about 2 topics, potentially, or majoring in these topics. So I'd like to touch on ocean capacity, or what's known as competition in the ocean. I'd like to start out by saying that competition does occur. I guess I probably could stop right there, but competition does occur. It's a normal aspect of a healthy ecosystem. It powers the functions that balance adaptation and equilibrium, especially in the presence of change. Competition is always happening. But competition is not isolated to the relationship between 2 species. It's the outcome of an entire system. It's like a spider's web. You pull one part, you're pulling all the parts. So, unfortunately, science, while making huge advancements in the past 200 years or so, or more, it's advanced mainly by using controlled experiments, right? Laboratory experiments. And in those experiments, you can artificially remove the rest of the web and you can focus on one little connection between 2 points in the web. You can't do that in ocean ecology. It's too big to try to understand that whole system and control everything. So instead, in marine ecology, we only have observations, and sometimes those observations contradict each other. The commissioner just talked about it. One of the ideas was that in order for there to be competition, two species should be in the same place at the same time eating the same food. That's where the competition. We didn't see that when we did the International Year of the Salmon survey in 2022. So, given that, it is possible to do useful research. Some aspects of a useful study on competition, I'm going to provide these to you, and if you want the list, just ask me, I'll give it to you so you don't have to write them all down. But useful research would look like this. It would have a wide and representative review of what is known. In other words, it wouldn't just start from just a small piece. It would actually take some time to look at what is already known about the background. I find that's a common error in many of the papers that I've read or had to review. Second, it would have a hypothesis. It would start with an expectation. What would I expect to see? From what I've just reviewed, what do I expect to be the relationship between two species, or a species in a food group or something? A species of salmon in a food group. Think about that. Come up with that hypothesis. It should be derived from the information you've collected. Third, it should just talk about and build in the expected cause and effect relationship and the assumptions that go with that interaction. That is often lacking. You can't necessarily find that in many of the papers that are out there. But if, speaking from a management agency, that's what we need. We need to understand those causes and what the potential effect would be. The results then should include the measurements, like cause and effect and how strong that effect is, so that it can be used in decisions. If you just tell me there's an effect, but I don't know whether it's a big problem, a medium problem, or no problem at all, I can't do much in helping advise on decisions. Finally, the discussion of expected outcomes should include information on what would happen if we actually made a change to the system, right? Don't just ask for a change in the way things are done. Provide a good outlook or a good treatment of what you'd expect to happen if you did make a change. I'm going to give you three real quick examples, and I'm providing them because I was given a platform, all right? So first of all, one of the biggest mistakes I see in the research that's out there is this description, common term, increasing hatchery production. I'm sure you've heard that. You've heard it from speakers. Oh, hatchery production is increasing. It's increasing. Yes, it increased from the mid-1970s to the late 1980s. From 1990 to present, it's been steady. Hatchery production has been steady. It goes up for some species, but it also goes down for others. And so there's variability that's happening. But total hatchery production, if you look at it, you can check me. It's the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission, and I'll give you that website if you'd like. And you've seen those plots. I was going to throw one up here for you, but I saved you from that. For pink salmon, from 1990 to 2024, entire North Pacific, the hatchery production has actually decreased. It's less now than it was in 1990. So, one common error that I find. Another common error is kind of a bait and switch. They do this large data set, all the pink salmon in the ocean study. They find an effect from having so many pink salmon in the ocean. And then the switch is, well, we're going to talk about just this subset that's hatchery fish. So all of the way way this works is it gets the reader thinking about what happens with all these pinks, and then takes all of that effect and applies it to, say, hatchery fish. All right, so that's a better way to do it would be to just go ahead and use the hatchery fish in your analysis. The data are there. It's easy to do. Third, people don't understand how small the lever is that you can actually use to make a change. If you use biomass, which is a better measure of ecosystem interactions, competition is almost always done with biomass, the total weight of fish, total weight of pinks, total weight of sockeye. and you include all ages. Current analyses generally use just adults, but for chums and sockeye, there are other age groups out there eating as well and competing. If you use that, then we see that all pink, biomass of all pinks, hatchery and wild, is only 22%, not the 70% if you just use adults and numbers of fish. Hatchery production then becomes 3.3% of that total. So now we're down to 3.3% of the total biomass of pinks, chums, and sockeyes in the ocean. Alaska hatcheries, the biggest around, 2%. That's what it is, 2%. So if you're going to make a 50% change in hatchery production, you're going to basically move the dial about 1%. Okay, so I just need to put that out there because it's relevant and important to understand. This is why the Alaska Department of Fish and Game takes time, thinks about, and is careful with the research we do and the way it's interpreted. Now, I was also going to talk about straying, but straying is something Craig might want to ask me if he wants some answers. I understand, for those of you who are concerned or have heard about it, there is a straying study that's been going on in Lower Cook Inlet. There were stray salmon from Prince William Sound found in the streams in Lower Cook Inlet. Staff started collecting in 2012. So from 2012 to 2017, there's a report out there, but those were not collected under a good, what we call an operational plan. There was no real way to interpret that information. So beginning in 2018 and through 2022, we implemented a study that's done it in a way that can be interpreted and used and trusted. So for those years, that report is coming out very soon. It's not out yet, and I would be looking for that to understand what's happening in your own backyard. With that said, and having gotten the nod, I used up Steve's 3 minutes. Thank you very much for your time.
I think I'll stay seated here. I think the two most important things we've heard here are that hatcheries are a big business and that we preferentially treat fisheries. Where those two things meet has historically been a problem for wildlife management. We eliminated market hunting in this country because we couldn't control those things. Hatcheries are different in that instead of taking something out of the system, we put something into the system. I think we have to recognize there's a carrying capacity to the ocean. Anybody disagree?
I just agreed, yes.
You disagree? You think this?
I agreed.
You agree. There's a carrying capacity to the ocean. And to Bill's point of what percent you put on it, there's tipping points. If you know anything about engineering and you engineer a beam for what it'll hold in the house, you put another 10 pounds on it, the engineer is going to tell you that sucker's going to collapse. You're just asking for trouble. I don't think all of the problems we're having with Alaska fisheries are related to hatcheries. I mean, I think, and I think Bill's probably going to agree with me on this one, warm water is an issue here. Warm water is pretty clearly an issue for pink salmon. Pink salmon biomass increases. We manage pink salmon for maximum sustained yield, which we probably, maybe we should think about not doing that. Maybe we should manage them for a lower number of wild fish and let the hatcheries make their money. And, we can cut some competition in the ocean because those pinks aren't worth much. I mean, it's like 75 cents a fish now. It's, compared to what other species are worth, it's chicken feed. And I want to correct Steve on one thing. Commercial fishermen aren't paying for those hatcheries. Cost recovery is paying for those hatcheries. And that cost recovery comes from fish grazing on a public pasture for which the hatcheries provide no compensation to the state. Why is that? We don't let oil and gas operators take it for themselves only. Should more of that money come back to the state? Should cost of recovery be increased and the hatcheries pay some sort of tax? It's nice to think of them as private, nonprofit hatcheries, but that's kind of a scam. They're businesses employing people, and their jobs are just like anybody else's jobs. They take home a paycheck. I remember when Lad McCauley started Douglas Island Pink and Chum in Juneau. I was there, and he used to complain to me about he had too much money coming in, and he needed to hire more people because he needed to get rid of profit. And I don't know how many he added, and if it had been Lad run out of control, he would have put a hatchery everywhere to try and use up that money so he wouldn't have a profit. The question then becomes, since we've set this up, in those cases where maybe it should be scaled back or unraveled, how do you do that? I mean, Cook Inlet is right now the biggest example of that. The Cook Inlet Aquaculture Association is, last time I checked, $18 million underwater. They got squat for cost recovery this year. They're going to need to borrow more money, probably be $20 million underwater. Technically, those fishermen who started this off paying to cover the cost of these things, and that is how it began before cost recovery picked up the cost of the hatcheries, they're on the hook for that. I mean, if somebody really want to make an issue of it, that money is something commercial fishermen who voted to set up these organizations are responsible for paying back. Now, it'd be chaos if the state tried to make them do that. But, you know, are we going to take a $20 million hit statewide? Just say we're going to forgive the loans? And do we want to keep going down this path knowing that these kinds of problems arise? There's just about 1 million questions here, none of which have answers. And, you know, Bill's right. There's nothing definitive you can say about what happens in the ocean. I mean, you can make a lot of correlations. You're proving causation. It's a mess out there. It's the jungle to the jungle extreme. I think we can agree on that too, right? Everything killing everything.
I'll agree on that part. I do think that there are some methods that could be applied by having your hypothesis before you have run your model and looked at your results. And that's a new thing coming out. It's been used in economics and now is being used in ecology, causal analyses.
And I agree with you to some extent and disagree with you because we've just gone through a pandemic where I've learned you can model anything.
Amen.
Maybe a couple thoughts. So Larry Phillips, American Sport Fishing Association. I spent 25 years with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife before coming on with ASA. We're a member trade organization. But there is a finite amount of productivity in the ocean. And there is natural variability that we struggle to understand annually in terms of what we see coming back. Our ability to maybe get this right is challenging, right? And I think there's lots of lessons to be learned in the lower 48. We've got 125 hatcheries. We traded the productivity of our river systems years ago for hydropower, for agriculture, for society. And you know, we're in a position right now where you can't turn that around, particularly in California, in some of our systems. But I think that some of the lessons to be learned here, we need to continue to ask these really difficult questions.
Yeah, and it's not just us. I mean, we have to recognize that the Russians, who we're now not talking to, they're putting a lot of fish into the North Pacific Ocean these days. And those fish play a part too. And as I think it was Kevin or was it Doug pointed out, the Japanese are still at it. We're collecting a lot of Japanese fish, Asian fish. It's a big problem that really needs an international solution. And I don't know how you get one of those at this point.
Well, I'd like to pipe in here. One, I worked with Lad, and I'd like to say that he was never in the position while he lived where he made too much money. Our organization had to support their organization for many years, and it was only after his passing, tragic, loss while he was working for the state of Alaska and died on this highway. We just traveled down today. And so he's looking from above thinking, well, we're doing a lot better now, but certainly not while he was alive running.
Well, all I can say is what he told me.
And so, but I'd like to speak to the carrying capacity. I mean, it's a dynamic equilibrium. It's not so simple. All those fish that are going into the ocean that Bill has mentioned, we're talking 5 billion hatchery fish. There's 25 billion wild fish going in, wild salmon going into the ocean. So in numbers, it's about 15%, and that's across the entire Pacific Rim. And Bill kind of went through those numbers, but there's a much greater competition out there from all nekton. You look at all nekton, so squid, and all the fishes, hatchery salmon in Alaska is less than 0.5%. I mean, it's minuscule compared to that complex competition going off in the ocean. In addition, the fish that we do release here in Alaska, 95% of them are dead within the first couple months, and they're being consumed by other fishes. It's not so simple as they just go out in the ocean and they compete and mow everything down. It's much more complex than that.
Well, of course it's more complex than that.
I'm not disagreeing. And as a matter of fact, I've been a proponent, as I spoke to, that we need to continue doing research.
And I don't disagree with you on 95% of them disappearing. I mean, that's the life of salmon. It's, they feed everything. It's not wild fish, hatchery fish. They all get massacred when they go to sea.
Yeah, the uniqueness of the difference here between this program and what we've got in the lower 48 in particular is we're mitigating for loss production. And whether we're doing it in a right measured way, you could argue that the 125 million hatchery Chinook that we're producing in the 3 states is potentially larger or different than what we historically produced there, or arguably maybe less. But in Alaska, there is already a mechanism that's constraining how much the ocean can produce. And when we artificially put fish into the ocean, again, upwards of 5 billion, there is a disruption in the complexity of those food webs, especially at various life stages, estuaries, and as you put it, some of those fish do die and they're consumed, but they're also competing for resources up until that
and
point.
we're not mitigating. We're producing. These aren't hatcheries to make up for what man did to mess things up. These are hatcheries to make money, solely to make money. We have done mitigation. We have the most successful mitigation program in the North American continent. It's right over here in Tustamina Lake, where they put hatchery fish in there. A lawsuit was filed. They put an end to putting hatchery fish in there. It became a self-sustaining fishery that we now worry about it over-escaping. It's the most successful mitigation project in the world. I can't think of any other, can you? I mean, they'd die for something like that in the Pacific Northwest.
Gentlemen, I'd like to hear a little about straying.
Should I go there? Should I go all heretic here? I'm going to be the heretic here. I think that we're worrying too much about straying. From what we know about salmon and hatcheries, they evolve very quickly. There's no reason to believe that happens any differently in the wild, where there's a lot of environmental pressures on them to change. Actually, Mr. Templin and I were talking about this beforehand, because I would love someone to go back and take some more genetic history on the Tustamina fish, Kizilov fish, and see if you can still find the fingerprint of hatchery fish in there. Because they may have evolved to the point now where it's hatchery feral, and now, well, they might as well all be wild, because genetically they're all kind of at the same point. It's not the big issue to me to worry about. The bigger issue to me is at-sea competition and what we have going on with predation, which I think Steve and I agree on, is another issue. I mean, I'm looking at Cook Inlet this year and have looked at Cook Inlet for a long time, and what you see on the north end of Cook Inlet is different than what you see in the middle and the south end of Cook Inlet. And it makes me wonder if, we have so many young fish, we're flooding the zone, so to speak, and the streams on this north end are paying the cost, or whether we get a bunch of predators massing out there because there's such an outflux of fry, and they happen to, for some reason, nail more north end fish than south end fish. But, I mean, those puzzles are huge. And yeah, Bill could spend 2 more careers trying to figure them out.
I'm just going to say it's a little surprising that I'm going to argue the other side. Straying is important. It is concerning. Okay? That doesn't mean that it's always going to have harm associated with it. If we see it, it's a signal that we should be paying attention, unless we've already dealt with that straying and determined that it's not a harm. It's an observance. Salmon stray, I mean, it's part of their life. Most of them will home, and that's why we can fish on these special populations of salmon. But sometimes, and for some species, a significant number of them will stray and go to another stream. That's why we have salmon in Cook Inlet. It wasn't so long ago that we were under 5,000 feet of ice here. So there were no salmon here at that time. So the salmon we have here came from somewhere as the ice moved back. That's the straying. That's a good thing. Homing is a good thing too, because if you survived to go out to the ocean, that must mean that wherever you were spawned was a good spot, right? So then you can go back to that spot and have a good chance of your offspring, your children, continuing to produce. Last straying is a
Bill,
problem, but it's a problem for different species.
a fatalist might think none of this is under our control. I mean, if you look at pink salmon in the Atlantic, I mean, they've kind of exploded there because of the warming water, and there may be things here we can't control or begin to control.
Next thing you'll do is you'll be asking for Atlantics over here.
I think the good news is that we've done made so many mistakes in the Northwest that we've studied a lot of these issues to death, and it can certainly inform some of the science about changes in fitness and gene flow and some of these areas where we're looking at these really difficult questions.
One more quick question that I have, I directed at Steve. Across the Gulf of Alaska, we're seeing a decline in the number of king salmon. Are the hatchery returns coming back as robust as you expected or historically, or are they dropping off and they're younger and smaller as well?
That's a big question. All salmon have decreased in size to some extent, and that includes king salmon probably more so than the rest of them. I guess I would say in Southeast Alaska, where there are almost 0 pink salmon hatcheries, and king salmon have been in a decline for about a decade, but over the last few years, including this year, the king salmon are coming back. Many of the stocks in Southeast have made their escapement goal, have had harvest, as you heard the commissioner talk about, and there is recovery in the face of having a large chum salmon program for 30 years, 35 years in Southeast Alaska. I think it's far too simplistic to say that it's cause and effect and you can point your finger and know for certain. And I would disagree with Craig that people don't care about straying. The reason we put $25 million into a straying study is because there is concern. There has been concern since the program was initiated in the early 70s. The genetics policy of the state pointed out there would be straying because all salmon stray to some extent, and pink salmon more than others. And so we want to know what is happening. And so I'm sorry to go on long on this, but currently we're doing research with kelp amino acids to see if we can improve the homing of the releases. And we've been doing work for decades on trying to improve the homing. It's a difficult thing because straying is genetically programmed in wild fish and therefore in the hatchery fish. And so straying is going to occur, but we're trying to mitigate that, is what I'd say.
Gentlemen, I'm going to call it in respect for the next panel, but I want to thank you for the dialogue. I want to thank you for the tenor of the dialogue, because as important as it is to disagree, it's probably even more important to do it civilly, constructively, and I want to thank you all very much for a great discussion.